The galaxy measured wealth in credits, but the things people remembered were usually much smaller. Steam drifted through the crowded food hall of Nexus Station 17, turning the cold white lights above into a hazy glow. The scent of vegetable broth, baked grain rolls, and recycled air hung over the hundreds of travelers packed inside the terminal. Outside the reinforced windows, a freezing rainstorm rattled against the transparent alloy panels as cargo ships came and went from the docking rings beyond. The station never truly slept. Freight crews shuffled through the aisles. Families dragged travel cases behind them. Pilots checked departure boards that flickered with destinations spanning dozens of star systems. Somewhere overhead, an automated voice announced boarding schedules in 6 languages. Most people ignored it. They were focused on dinner. Near the end of one serving line stood a young alien woman wearing a faded gray jacket several sizes too large for her slender frame. Her silver hair spilled from beneath a worn hood. Raindrops still clung to the fabric around her shoulders. She kept her head down, kept her eyes on her hands, and counted. 1 coin, then another, then another. 17 small metal credits rested in her palm. She counted them once, then again, then a third time, as if the numbers might somehow change if she looked long enough. They never did. Lyra Wren swallowed and glanced toward the glowing menu suspended above the counter. Large soup. Too expensive. Standard meal. Too expensive. Protein platter. Not even close. Her eyes settled on the smallest option available. 1 basic cup of station soup. She quietly exhaled. It would be enough. At least for tonight. The line shuffled forward. The elderly Vorten worker behind her shifted impatiently. A pair of freight handlers whispered to one another while checking the clock. Nobody seemed cruel. Nobody seemed kind. They simply seemed busy. The way people often did when they had somewhere to be. Lyra closed her fingers around the coins. The metal felt cold against her skin. 3 days. 3 days since she'd last eaten a proper meal. She tried not to think about it. Thinking made it worse. Across the food hall, seated alone near a window streaked with rain, Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. He had spent most of the last 15 years moving between military outposts, transport hubs, and distant colonies. After a while, stations started to look the same. Different planets. Same tired faces. Same announcements. Same crowds. But people never stopped being interesting. His attention drifted toward the serving line. Toward the silver-haired girl counting coins. Something about the way she kept checking the total caught his eye. Not panic. Not desperation. Something quieter. Pride. The kind that refused to ask for help even when help was needed. Ethan leaned back in his chair and watched as the line moved another few feet forward. Lyra counted the coins again. 17. Still 17. Outside, thunder rolled through the storm clouds surrounding the station. The windows vibrated softly. Inside, the warmth of the food hall pressed against the cold beyond the glass. Lyra reached the front of the line. The glowing menu reflected in her pale blue eyes as she opened her hand one last time and stared down at the small collection of coins resting in her palm. For a moment, she looked as though she were preparing for something far bigger than ordering a cup of soup. The service clerk barely looked up from the register. A glowing scanner swept across the menu board while orders streamed through the system one after another. Travelers stepped forward, paid, collected their meals, and moved on. Everything happened with the efficiency of a machine. Lyra stood frozen for a moment, her fingers still wrapped around the 17 coins. The line behind her shifted again. Someone cleared their throat. Another traveler glanced at the departure clock mounted above the food hall. Time seemed to move faster for everyone except her. Finally, she placed the coins on the counter one at a time. The metallic clicks sounded strangely loud against the background noise. The clerk glanced down. His eyes moved from the coins to the menu, then back to the coins. His expression tightened slightly. Basic soup, he asked. Lyra nodded. Yes. The clerk tapped a few commands onto the register. A number appeared on the screen. Lyra immediately knew something was wrong. Her stomach sank. You are short by 3 credits, the clerk said. His tone was not rude, just tired. The kind of tired that came from repeating the same sentence too many times every day. Lyra stared at the display. 3 credits. It might as well have been 3,000. She looked back at the coins, counted them again in her head. 17. Still 17. Around her, conversations continued. Trays clattered. Steam hissed from industrial food dispensers. Nobody seemed to notice the small crisis unfolding at the front of the line. Lyra swallowed. I thought the price was lower. The clerk shook his head. Prices were adjusted yesterday. Supply costs. He pointed toward a small update notice glowing in the corner of the menu board. She had not seen it. For several seconds, she said nothing. Her shoulders remained straight. Her expression remained calm. But inside, disappointment settled heavily in her chest. 3 days of stretching every remaining credit. 3 days of telling herself tomorrow would be easier. 3 days of believing she could make the numbers work. And now she could not even afford the smallest meal on the board. I understand, she said quietly. She began gathering the coins back into her palm. The elderly worker behind her shifted uncomfortably. A young mother holding a sleepy child looked away. Nobody wanted to embarrass her. Nobody knew what to say. Ethan watched everything from across the hall. He had seen this moment before. Different planets. Different faces. Same expression. People thought hunger looked dramatic. Usually it did not. Usually it looked exactly like this. Someone pretending they were not disappointed. Someone trying to leave with their dignity intact. He set down his coffee cup. The ceramic made a soft click against the table. Then he stood. The chair slid backward across the floor. A few nearby travelers glanced up briefly before returning to their meals. Ethan slipped one hand into the pocket of his weather jacket and walked toward the serving line. His boots echoed softly against the polished station floor. Lyra had just finished collecting the last coin when a calm voice spoke beside her. Add her meal to mine. She turned. A tall man stood there with rain still drying on his shoulders. His posture was relaxed. His expression was ordinary. Not pity, not sympathy, just certainty. Ethan stepped closer to the counter and placed his meal card beside the register. The clerk blinked. Sir. Ethan nodded toward the menu board. Give her the large bowl instead. Lyra immediately shook her head. No. The answer came faster than she expected. Ethan looked at her. No, I cannot accept that. Her voice remained polite, but firm. Ethan studied her for a moment. Then a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile that suggested he had heard that answer many times before. For a second, neither of them moved. The food hall continued around them as if nothing unusual had happened. Trays slid across counters. Travelers discussed departure times. Rain tapped steadily against the station windows. Yet somehow the space around the register felt quieter than before. Lyra tightened her grip on the coins. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I cannot take charity from a stranger. Ethan glanced at the 17 credits still resting in her hand. Good thing it is not charity then. One of her silver eyebrows lifted slightly. It is not. No. He nodded toward the menu board. It is dinner. The clerk looked back and forth between them, uncertain whether to continue the transaction. Lyra seemed equally uncertain. She had expected pity. She had expected sympathy. Both were familiar. This was different. The human standing beside her did not look concerned about being thanked. He did not appear interested in hearing her story. He simply looked like a man trying to solve a problem that was standing directly in front of him. I can pay you back, she finally said. Ethan shrugged. If it makes you feel better. It does. Then we have a deal. The answer came so quickly that Lyra blinked. Ethan turned toward the register. Large soup. Extra bread. The clerk nodded and entered the order. Steam immediately rose from one of the dispensers. Warm light reflected across polished metal surfaces as automated systems prepared the meal. The smell alone made Lyra realize how hungry she actually was. She hated that realization. Hunger was easier to manage when ignored. A small chime sounded. The order was ready. The clerk placed a large bowl onto a tray along with a thick grain roll and a bottle of filtered water. Ethan reached for his meal card. Before he could complete the payment, a voice came from farther back in the line. Add mine too. Several heads turned. A cargo pilot near the middle of the queue raised his hand. Mine as well. Another voice followed. Then another. For a moment the entire line seemed confused by what was happening. The elderly Vorten worker standing behind Lyra stepped forward. And mine. A young mother balancing a sleepy child on one shoulder smiled faintly. Mine too. Ethan looked over his shoulder. The line stretched nearly 40 feet across the food hall. Travelers from half a dozen worlds stood waiting beneath the bright station lights. One by one, more people volunteered. Not loudly, not dramatically, just ordinary people making ordinary decisions. The clerk stared at the growing list on his display. You are all serious? A freight handler laughed. Looks like you started something. Human. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I only came over to buy one meal. Too late, someone called from the line. Quiet laughter spread through the crowd. Lyra stood motionless as she watched strangers offer help to other strangers. No contracts, no obligations, no expectation of profit. The idea felt almost unreal. In the world she knew, every exchange carried a price. Every favor created a debt. Yet standing there beneath the soft glow of the food hall lights, surrounded by people who would likely never meet again, she witnessed something that made far less sense and somehow felt far more valuable. The moment passed as quickly as it had begun. Orders resumed. Trays moved down the counter. Conversations returned. Yet something invisible had shifted inside the food hall. The atmosphere felt warmer than the heating systems alone could explain. Lyra accepted the tray with both hands. The bowl radiated heat through the recycled composite material. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of vegetables and herbs. For a second, she simply stood there looking at it. Then she realized Ethan was already walking away. "Wait," she called. He stopped and turned. "You forgot your dinner." Ethan glanced toward the second tray waiting beside the register. "Good catch." The clerk slid it toward him. "You almost paid for 2 meals and left hungry yourself." Ethan chuckled. That would have been embarrassing. A few nearby travelers laughed. The tension dissolved completely. Lyra found herself smiling despite everything. It felt unfamiliar. She carried her tray toward a quiet table near the windows while Ethan returned to the seat he had occupied earlier. Rain continued streaking across the transparent alloy beyond the glass. Cargo lights blinked through the storm outside like distant stars. The station seemed smaller now somehow. Less cold. Less anonymous. As Lyra settled into her chair, she noticed a teenage boy sitting 2 tables away holding a small recording device. He replayed something on the screen and grinned. His friend leaned over to watch. "You got the whole thing?" the friend asked. "Almost all of it." The boy adjusted the angle of the recording. "Look at their faces when everybody joined in." His friend laughed softly. "You should upload it." "Maybe." The conversation faded into the background as Lyra picked up a spoon. The first taste of soup nearly made her close her eyes. Warm. Simple. Nothing extraordinary. Yet after days of uncertainty, it felt like the best meal she had ever eaten. Across the room, Ethan sat alone by the window, eating slowly while reading station updates on a small data screen. He seemed completely unaware of the attention he had attracted. Nobody gathered around him. Nobody treated him like a hero. He looked exactly like what he was. A tired soldier enjoying dinner during a layover. That confused Lyra more than anything. Most people who performed public acts of generosity wanted something in return. Recognition, admiration, influence. Ethan appeared interested only in finishing his meal before it got cold. The teenage boy finally uploaded the recording anyway. He added a simple caption. Nothing dramatic. Nothing designed to attract attention. Just a short description of strangers helping strangers during a storm delay on Nexus Station 17. Then he sent it into the endless current of the galactic net and forgot about it almost immediately. Millions of videos were uploaded every hour. Most disappeared within minutes. The boy assumed this one would do the same. Outside, thunder rolled again across the dark clouds surrounding the station. Another wave of rain rattled against the windows. Inside, travelers continued eating beneath warm lights and drifting steam. Nobody noticed a small recording beginning its journey across the stars. Nobody knew that a few minutes captured on a crowded station would eventually reach worlds far beyond Nexus 17. And certainly nobody suspected that the quiet silver-haired woman eating soup by the window would soon become far more important to that story than anyone in the room could possibly imagine. Nearly an hour passed before Lyra realized she was still sitting in the same chair. The bowl in front of her was empty now. Only a few crumbs remained from the bread. Yet she lingered by the window, watching streams of rain race across the transparent panels overlooking the docking bays. The storm had grown worse. Sheets of icy water swept across the exterior structures, while warning lights flashed amber along the station framework. Overhead, a calm automated voice interrupted the usual announcements. Attention travelers. Due to severe atmospheric interference affecting regional traffic corridors, all departures are temporarily delayed. A collective groan rolled through the terminal. Travelers checked schedules. Pilots muttered under their breath. Several children celebrated the unexpected extension of their vacation. Ethan barely reacted. He simply looked up from his data screen, read the update, and took another sip of coffee. Delays were part of space travel. Fighting them never helped. A few minutes later, he noticed movement near his table. Lyra stood there holding her empty tray. "May I sit?" she asked. Ethan gestured toward the open chair. "You do not need permission. Old habit." She sat down carefully. For a moment, neither spoke. The station hummed around them. Ventilation systems whispered through overhead ducts. Cargo elevators rumbled somewhere below. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. "Why did you do it?" Ethan glanced up. "By dinner?" "No." She folded her hands together. "That part won't understand. What I do not understand is everything after that." Ethan leaned back slightly. "Everything after that was not me. You started it." "Maybe." He looked toward the serving line, now much shorter than before. People usually want an excuse to be decent. Sometimes they just need somebody to go first. Lyra considered that. The answer felt too simple. Most important truths often did. Outside, lightning flashed behind distant clouds, briefly illuminating rows of docked ships. The reflection shimmered across the glass. "Where I come from," she said quietly. "Every favor creates an obligation." Ethan nodded. "A lot of places work that way." "Then what do you expect from me?" Ethan laughed softly. "Nothing. Nothing. You were hungry." He shrugged. "Now you are not." Lyra stared at him. "That cannot be enough reason." "Seems to be working so far." For the first time since arriving on the station, she found herself genuinely confused. Not by technology, not by culture, by kindness. The concept felt strangely difficult to calculate. A sudden alert chimed across the terminal. Several large screens flickered to life. Weather maps expanded across their surfaces. Bright red patterns swirled across regional space lanes. "Extended delay expected," the station announced. Estimated duration, 48 hours. The reaction this time was much louder. Travelers exchanged worried looks. Some immediately began searching for lodging. Others rushed toward customer service stations. Within minutes, long lines formed throughout the terminal. Ethan sighed. "Looks like we are all stuck here for a while." Lyra followed his gaze across the increasingly crowded concourse. People hurried in every direction beneath the white station lights. The storm outside showed no sign of weakening. Somewhere in the chaos, the small video uploaded by a teenager continued spreading quietly through the galactic net, gathering views one stranger at a time while neither of them noticed. For now, they remained simply two travelers sharing a table beside a rain-streaked window, unaware that the storm trapping them inside the station was about to change far more than their travel plans. By the second day, the station no longer felt like a transit hub. It felt like a temporary city. Blankets appeared in waiting areas. Families claimed corners near charging stations. Pilots slept in reclining chairs. Business travelers who had once rushed through the corridors now stood in long lines for coffee and weather updates. Outside, the storm continued to batter the station with relentless determination. Waves of rain and electrical interference made departure impossible. Inside, resources remained stable, but everyone knew delays became harder with each passing hour. Ethan spent most of the morning helping where he could, not because anyone asked, simply because sitting still had never been one of his talents. When an elderly traveler struggled to move several heavy cargo cases across the terminal, Ethan carried them. When a maintenance worker dropped a container of supplies, Ethan helped collect them. When a mother needed a few minutes to rest while her young son chased a toy drone through the waiting area, Ethan distracted the child with stories about distant colonies until she could catch her breath. None of it seemed important. None of it seemed unusual. At least not to him. Lyra noticed every bit of it. She sat near one of the observation windows, pretending to read station updates on a public terminal while secretly watching him move through the crowd. The strange thing was that Ethan never stayed long enough to receive thanks. He would help, nod politely, then continue on as though nothing had happened. It made no sense. "You are studying him again." Lyra nearly jumped. The voice belonged to an elderly Vorton woman seated nearby, the same traveler who had stood behind her in the food line the previous evening. Lyra looked away from Ethan. "I am not studying him." The woman smiled knowingly. "Of course not." Lyra sighed. "I simply do not understand him." The woman glanced across the terminal. Ethan was currently kneeling beside a malfunctioning public information kiosk, helping a station technician access a maintenance panel. "Neither do I," the woman admitted. "That is why I find him interesting." Across the station, another announcement echoed overhead. Temporary ration limits had been introduced to ensure supplies lasted through the delay. The decision was reasonable. Most travelers accepted it immediately, Ethan accepted it too. Later that afternoon, Lyra watched him receive his allotted meal portion from a service counter. A simple tray. Enough for one person. Nothing more. Then she watched him divide it. Half went to a young freight apprentice who had missed breakfast after standing in a service line for nearly 3 hours. The other half went to a tired station employee still working double shifts because of the weather emergency. Ethan kept only a bottle of water and a nutrition bar for himself. Lyra stared in disbelief. When she finally approached him, he was sitting alone near Docking Ring C, looking out at the storm. You gave away your lunch. Ethan looked at the nutrition bar in his hand. Technically, I kept part of it. That is not the point. Probably not. He smiled. Lyra folded her arms. You realize there is a chance you may need those resources later. Ethan looked through the window where lightning flashed silently beyond the clouds. Maybe. Then why do it? He thought for a moment before answering. Because right now they needed it more than I did. Lyra shook her head slowly. Every logical system she knew insisted that resources should be protected, calculated, preserved. Yet somehow the human beside her seemed to operate by an entirely different equation. And what unsettled her most was the possibility that his equation might actually work. The storm finally began to weaken late on the third day. The constant drumming of rain against the station windows softened to a gentle rhythm. Travelers gathered near departure boards, hopeful that routes would soon reopen. Ethan was helping a maintenance crew stack portable seating near one of the crowded terminals when his wrist communicator vibrated unexpectedly. He glanced at the screen and frowned. 23 unread messages. By the time he opened the first one, the number had climbed to 31. Most came from former military friends scattered across different systems. The messages were strangely similar. Have you seen this yet? Is this actually you? Since when did you become famous? Ethan blinked. Famous was not a word anyone had ever used to describe him. Curious, he opened the attached link. A familiar scene appeared on the display. A crowded food hall. A serving line. A silver-haired alien woman counting coins. Then the recording showed a tired soldier stepping forward beside her. Ethan groaned quietly. You have got to be kidding me. The teenage traveler had uploaded the video. Somehow it had escaped the endless flood of content flowing through the galactic net. Then someone with a large audience shared it. Then another. Then another. The numbers displayed beneath the recording were absurd. Millions of views. Tens of millions. Comments streamed so quickly they blurred together. People from hundreds of worlds debated what they had witnessed. Some claimed the moment represented the best qualities of humanity. Others insisted it had to be staged. More surprising were the responses appearing beneath the video. Travelers shared stories of strangers helping strangers. Station workers described acts of kindness they had witnessed. Pilots posted photographs of free meals purchased for exhausted crews. The simple recording seemed to have awakened something. Nearby, Lyra was reviewing weather reports when her own terminal chimed repeatedly. She looked down and froze. The same video filled her screen. Her image occupied the opening frame. The view count continued rising faster than the system could update. She watched the recording in silence. The camera had captured details she never noticed at the time. The hesitation before Ethan stepped forward. The uncertainty on her face. The moment other travelers joined in. Most of all, it captured something impossible to fake. Nobody in the video appeared interested in attention. That was precisely why people believed it. Well, Ethan said as he approached her table, that escalated. Lyra looked up from the screen. 48 million views. Ethan glanced at the number. That seems excessive. People are discussing you across the entire network. I was hoping they would not. She almost laughed. You are disappointed? A little. He pulled out a chair and sat down. I preferred being anonymous. Lyra shook her head in disbelief. Most people spent years chasing recognition. Ethan appeared mildly inconvenienced by it. Around them, travelers continued checking schedules and preparing for departures. Yet more than a few recognized the faces from the viral recording. Some smiled as they passed. Others offered small nods of appreciation. Ethan accepted each gesture with visible discomfort. What neither of them realized was that the video was no longer the story. It had become the spark. Across dozens of worlds, people had already begun copying what they saw. And the first wave of that change was only beginning. The departures resumed the following morning. One by one, ships began leaving the station as weather corridors reopened across the sector. Yet something unusual appeared on the public information screens. It was not another storm warning. It was not a political announcement. It was a growing collection of stories. A cargo crew on a mining world had purchased meals for an entire night shift after watching the recording. A university cafeteria on Centauri Prime had introduced a program allowing students to anonymously pay for meals for strangers. A transport hub nearly 3,000 light-years away reported travelers leaving prepaid credits behind for anyone facing an unexpected delay. The stories kept coming. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Someone eventually gave the movement a name. One Bowl Forward. Nobody knew who invented the phrase. It simply appeared one day and spread faster than anyone expected. By noon, the words were appearing on station displays, social feeds, and community message boards throughout the network. Ethan stared at a news report and rubbed his forehead. This is getting out of hand. Lyra looked over his shoulder. Most people would consider this a positive development. I bought soup. Apparently, you started a social movement. Ethan sighed. That feels like an overreaction. Lyra smiled. You are the only person in the galaxy disappointed by becoming inspirational. Nearby, several travelers laughed after overhearing the conversation. Ethan looked genuinely embarrassed. That only seemed to make people like him more. Later that afternoon, while waiting for final boarding clearance, Lyra sat alone beside the observation windows. Her terminal displayed report after report connected to the growing movement. Community kitchens, free meal programs, neighborhood groups helping travelers. Small acts multiplying across worlds that would never meet each other. She should have been pleased by the statistics alone. Instead, she found herself thinking about something else. One person, one decision, one moment at a food counter. The numbers were impressive. The cause was not. The cause had been remarkably simple. A hungry stranger. A human who noticed. Footsteps approached. Ethan lowered himself into the chair across from her. Your ship finally boarding? She asked. 30 minutes. Mine leaves in 45. For a moment, neither spoke. Beyond the glass, transport vessels glided through clearing skies. Sunlight finally pierced the clouds surrounding the station, turning droplets of rain into scattered gold. I owe you 17 credits, Lyra said suddenly. Ethan laughed. You remembered the exact amount. Of course. She reached into her pocket and placed several small coins onto the table. The same 17 credits. Ethan looked at them, then back at her. Keep them. That defeats the purpose. Not really. He gently pushed the coins back toward her. Use them for somebody else when they need it. Lyra stared at the small pile of metal resting between them. Such a tiny amount. Such an insignificant thing. Yet somehow it felt heavier than before. Across the terminal, a boarding announcement echoed through the station. Travelers gathered their bags. Conversations ended. Journeys resumed. But as Lyra closed her hand around the 17 credits, she realized something had changed. Not in the station. Not in the network. In her. And for the first time, she understood that kindness was not valuable because it solved every problem. It was valuable because it gave people permission to believe they could make a difference at all. 1 year later, Nexus Station 17 looked exactly the same and completely different. The docking rings still glowed against the darkness of space. Cargo ships still arrived behind schedules. Travelers still hurried through the corridors beneath bright white lights. Yet scattered throughout the station were small signs carrying 3 familiar words. One Bowl Forward. Some appeared above food counters. Others hung beside public seating areas. A few had been hand-painted by travelers and donated to the station. Nobody owned the movement anymore. It belonged to everyone. Ethan Walker noticed the first sign almost immediately after stepping off his transport shuttle. He stopped for a moment and shook his head. Still here, he muttered. A nearby station employee laughed. It is everywhere now. Ethan smiled politely and continued walking. He was only passing through. Another temporary stop. Another ordinary day. At least that was what he expected. The food hall looked nearly identical to the one he remembered. Steam drifted from serving counters. Conversations blended into a steady background hum. Rain tapped softly against the distant observation windows. For a moment, he stood quietly near the entrance, watching people move through their routines. Then something caught his attention. A young traveler stood at the register counting coins. Not enough. The disappointment appeared on the traveler's face before a word was spoken. Ethan recognized the expression instantly. Before he could take a single step forward, another customer approached the counter and covered the missing amount. No speeches. No applause. No attention. The traveler smiled in surprise. The customer returned to their meal. Life continued. Ethan laughed softly to himself. He was not needed anymore. Across the room, someone else had already learned the lesson. Near one of the windows sat a woman with silver hair and calm blue eyes. Lyra. Rin watched the scene unfold while holding a warm cup between her hands. She had arrived 2 hours earlier and recognized Ethan the moment he entered the hall. Yet she did not call out immediately. Instead, she watched him notice the small act of kindness. She watched the realization appear on his face. The movement had survived. More than survived. It had grown beyond either of them. Finally, she stood and approached. Ethan turned. Surprise crossed his features. Then a genuine smile followed. Lyra. Ethan. For a moment, they simply stood there beneath the warm station lights. No dramatic reunion. No grand ceremony. Just two travelers crossing paths again. Lyra reached into her pocket and removed 17 small coins. The same coins she had carried for an entire year. She placed them gently on the table beside him. Ethan looked down and laughed. You kept them. Not exactly. She pointed toward the serving line. I used them hundreds of times. Confusion crossed his face. Lyra smiled. I just kept replacing them. Ethan stared at the coins for a second before shaking his head. Outside, sunlight reflected across departing ships. Inside, strangers helped strangers without expecting anything in return. Neither of them spoke. They simply watched the station continue around them. And in the quiet that followed, the truth felt obvious. The galaxy had not changed because one person bought a bowl of soup. The galaxy changed because kindness proved something people desperately needed to remember. Compassion is not a resource that runs out. The more it is shared, the more of it remains. And sometimes the smallest thing a person gives away becomes the one thing that lasts.